Welcome back. In this video, we're breaking down Season 2 of Andor. If you're here, it means something in you has already started to see it. The quiet way stories shape what we expect from the world, what we tolerate, what we trust. Andor isn't just another Star Wars story. It's one of the most emotionally sophisticated pieces of media in recent years. But instead of inspiring rebellion, it gently walks you through how to survive under control and even find pride in it. Before we break down Season 2, episode by episode, we need to look back at the world Season 1 built around us. Not just the plot, but the emotional conditioning that took place beneath it. Because Andor didn't just tell a story, it trained you. It starts with the idea of the hero. For generations, stories have used heroes to capture our attention. The chosen one, the brave one, the one who makes the impossible choice. But this idea has side effects, because when we're always watching someone else save the day, we begin to believe that someone else always will. Hero stories can weaken people. They invite passivity. They teach us to look up instead of inward. Andor flips the hero completely. Cassian doesn't fight because of clarity or courage. He fights because he's been cornered. He's not driven by purpose. He's drifting through survival. This shapes how we see resistance. It becomes something that belongs to damaged, complicated men, not something we ourselves might be part of. That's the first layer of conditioning. But there's much more. In Season 1, trust is constantly undermined. No relationship is safe. Rebels turn on each other, leaders lie, and even the ones who seem loyal are treated as disposable. This normalizes emotional distance. You're shown that movements don't grow through trust. They survive through secrecy and suspicion. The show also reframes rebellion itself. It's never portrayed as hopeful or visionary. It's messy, it's violent, it's reactive. Even when it works, it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like grief. Ferrix doesn't rise. Ferrix mourns. Namek doesn't change the galaxy. He dies with his manifesto unread. Meanwhile, those who obey, like Cyril Karn, are given structure. When he falls in line, he finds stability. He may not rise far, but he fits in. This becomes the emotional reward. Quiet compliance brings peace, while resistance brings chaos. The Empire, in contrast, is composed, organized, and eerily competent. Officers use formal, polished language. They talk in clean metaphors and manage atrocities like spreadsheets. Because they speak without rage or drama, they start to feel rational. And when rebellion is shown as erratic and personal, order becomes easier to respect. You're also shown a world where surveillance isn't aggressive, it's ambient. Cameras, transcripts, and monitoring systems fade into the background. No one fights them. No one questions them. This presentation teaches us to accept constant observation as part of modern life. In Andor, no one gathers around a vision. People carry their hopes alone. There's no unifying message, just a scatter of losses, grudges, and unfinished business. That kind of story trains viewers to lower their expectations. It replaces the dream of revolution with the habit of endurance. Luthen Rael, one of the most compelling characters in the series, reinforces this. He doesn't lead with inspiration. He doesn't promise a better world. He moves pieces. He calculates risk. His power comes from control, not vision, and that reshapes the emotional tone of rebellion itself. The show also manipulates language constantly. Brutality is softened through phrasing. Deaths become misadventures. Prison becomes reassignment. These aren't just words. They're tools. And because the characters rarely push back, the viewer begins to absorb that vocabulary without resistance. Emotion, too, is shown as dangerous. Characters who express love, rage, or vulnerability are isolated or destroyed. Marva is silenced. Bix is tortured. Kino rallies men to escape but doesn't escape with them. The underlying message is simple. Those who feel too deeply become a liability. Throughout Season 1, we also see that survival consistently takes priority over meaning. No one stops to dream of a better system. They just try to make it through. The most repeated wisdom is, build your exit on your way in. You're being trained to see rebellion as a matter of escape routes, not transformation. Even visually, the Empire is framed as the adult in the room. Their clothing is pristine. Their architecture is solid. Their meetings are orderly. Meanwhile, the rebels sleep in caves, argue about leadership, and die alone. Over time, competence starts to matter more than morality. And perhaps the deepest cut, there is no utopia. No one in the show speaks about the world they want to create. No scenes explore what freedom would actually feel like. The struggle becomes the destination. The idea of real change, even if hinted at, fades into something abstract and unstable. And this doesn't just shape what you think. It conditions how you feel. As the season unfolds, your nervous system starts to adjust. You stop waiting for catharsis. You stop expecting justice. Instead, you begin to mirror the show's rhythm, bracing for loss, preparing for betrayal, finding comfort in control. This is emotional training. Quiet, repetitive, effective. The story installs its worldview layer by layer, using 13 distinct psychological patterns, each one reinforcing the last, until the idea of resistance feels like a noble myth and obedience starts to feel like maturity. Here's how that training is delivered. 1. The broken hero blueprint. Modern storytelling has spent decades building the myth of the hero, the chosen one, the exception, the lone figure who rises while everyone else waits. At first it seems empowering, but over time it creates passivity. When only extraordinary people change the world, the rest of us are left to spectate. We're trained to wait for saviors, not become them. This is one of the oldest forms of emotional programming. Tell ordinary people they're not enough, then feed them stories where someone else does what they can't. In this setup, personal power fades. Agency becomes entertainment. Andor takes that formula and flips it sideways, but the damage still lands. Cassian isn't portrayed as courageous or visionary. He's hesitant, withdrawn, and burned out. He doesn't move with clarity. He stumbles. He hides. His resistance comes from being pushed, not from choosing to rise. He's not a hero you dream of becoming. He's a case study in survival. And when audiences shift from aspiring to someone to merely observing them, something changes inside. Action begins to feel distant. Heroism begins to feel heavy. You don't feel pulled to act. You feel conditioned to endure. 2. Loyalty without trust. Almost every connection is fragile. Friends lie, leaders manipulate, rebels hide their pasts. Trust doesn't grow, it erodes. This creates a world where shared vision feels unrealistic and where emotional distance becomes the safest choice. 3. Rebellion feels like grief. The fight never lifts anyone. It drains them, it buries them. Marva dies alone. Namik's words reach no one while he lives. Bix suffers in silence. Resistance is constantly linked to pain, and even the rare moments of success are soaked in mourning. The emotional signal is clear. Action leads to loss, not renewal. 4. Obedience rewards. You with stability. Cyril Karn's arc is the clearest example. When he conforms, he gains structure. When he questions, he unravels. The system doesn't love him, but it gives him purpose. That purpose feels calm. And as viewers, we're quietly taught that obedience isn't weakness. It's the doorway to emotional relief. Fifth clinical framing of tyranny. Empire officers speak in clean, rational language. They manage oppression like operations managers. Words like efficiency, containment, and flow control replace any direct acknowledgement of violence. Because the language is smooth and unemotional, the audience learns to accept it the same way, with a nod, not a flinch. 6. Sanitized surveillance. The tools of control are never dramatic. They're quiet, constant. Screens hum, logs update, data flows. The characters rarely challenge it, and because they don't, we absorb it too. As background noise, not a threat. The audience gets used to being watched. 7. Hope becomes a private burden. No one shares a dream. Every character clings to a small, private version of meaning. A sister, a memory, a name. There's no manifesto, no shared anthem. Hope doesn't unite, it isolates. And over time, the viewer learns to treat hope like a personal chore. Heavy, quiet, and unsupported. 8. Rebellion is functional, never spiritual. There are no speeches about peace, no paintings of a better galaxy. Luthen moves assets. Vel memorizes schedules. Strategy replaces spirit. The rebellion becomes logistics. And without emotional vision, viewers lose the sense that resistance could feel beautiful, or even human. 9. Language destroys truth. Words are bent until they blur. A murder becomes a misadventure. Torture is interrogation. Imprisonment is temporary reassignment. These shifts are never questioned by the characters, and so they become normalized for the audience. Language turns from a tool of liberation into a mechanism of control. 10th, emotion is a liability. Those who express feeling are exposed. Marva is erased before her final act can finish. Kino can inspire others but not escape himself. Bix is crushed by what she carries. Emotion brings exposure, and exposure brings pain. The lesson lands quietly. Strength comes from silence. 11th, survival matters more than justice. There's no vision of transformation. Characters talk about staying alive, getting out, finishing the job. No one dreams beyond the moment. And so, the rebellion becomes a series of damage control maneuvers. The audience begins to expect survival, not change, and that expectation becomes an emotional habit. 12. The villain is well dressed. Empire officers are presented with dignity and composure. They speak in complete sentences. They plan, they execute, they rarely falter. Rebels, in contrast, shout, bleed, and second-guess. Competence begins to feel more valuable than morality, and viewers unconsciously align with whoever seems more in control. 13. Utopia never arrives. Throughout the entire season, no one describes the world they want to build. There's no blueprint, no collective dream. And without that vision, the revolution loses shape. What remains is pressure, motion, struggle without destination. The nervous system stops waiting for joy and settles into tension. This is what Season 1 builds inside you. Before a single scene of Season 2 begins, the groundwork is already done. You've been trained to survive, to observe, to understand the machine, and to expect pain when anyone tries to challenge it. Let's move forward to Season 2, which doesn't reset the frame. It deepens it. The season begins with the quiet, slow beat of tension already embedded in the viewer, and it doesn't try to lift you out of it. Instead, it folds you deeper into it. The first episode, titled 1 Year Later, shows us a galaxy where rebellion has become routine, and fear has become a background rhythm. The opening scene doesn't announce triumph or momentum. Instead, it offers a soft-spoken initiation. A young woman is told she's brave simply for showing up, but the entire interaction feels like a ritual meant more to steady her nerves than ignite any shared purpose. Her courage is never for herself. It is measured by how well she can disappear into her assigned role. This continues the same emotional blueprint laid in Season 1. Hope remains solitary, heavy, and quiet. Cassian, meanwhile, doesn't arrive with a new mindset. He's scrambling again, fumbling through a botched test flight and desperately trying to stay ahead of a system that knows exactly where he is and what he might do next. His experience doesn't feel redemptive. It feels mechanical. There is no grand arc, just another cycle. Once again, we are watching a man who doesn't rise into purpose. He slips sideways into necessity. This continues to train viewers in the broken hero model, action as exhaustion rather than clarity. The relationships still carry the same fragility. Conversations remain veiled. Motivations remain private. Everyone moves through alliances the same way they move through hallways, quickly and with the hope that no one is watching. We remain deep inside the tactic of loyalty without trust. As the episode unfolds, the tension in Ferrex returns. But even when familiar characters like Bix and Brasso appear, the emotional tone hasn't changed. They're tired, damaged, going through routines. And this time, the sense of stability comes not from defiance, but from bureaucracy. The imperial routine becomes a strangely soothing presence. Quiet, consistent, and clean. Obedience continues to reward stability, even if it brings no joy. The second episode, Sagrona Tima, continues the emotional training of the viewer. But this time, it cloaks the conditioning in wealth, ritual, and tradition. Chandrilan High Society becomes a performance stage, polished, composed, and entirely hollow. We watch Mon Mothma's daughter participate in an arranged marriage ceremony, one draped in elegance and heritage. The scene moves slowly, almost reverently, as if inviting respect. But beneath the choreographed gestures and ceremonial phrases, something far more troubling is at work. This ritual isn't just about family or culture. It's a quiet rehearsal in emotional obedience. Every moment teaches the children, and by extension the viewer, how to sacrifice autonomy while smiling. There is no resistance, no room for questioning. What's being sold as legacy is actually a soft form of surrender. And this is where the genius of the conditioning lies. It doesn't use fear. It uses etiquette. It doesn't remove freedom through force. It replaces it with structure. Structure becomes comfort. Comfort becomes identity. And identity becomes something assigned, not chosen. The audience watches a society that worships compliance, and in doing so is invited to sympathize with it. While this unfolds on Chandrila, we shift to Gorman, and the tone sharpens. Krennic appears, but not as a brutal enforcer. He doesn't need to shout. Instead, he sits at the center of a boardroom surrounded by professionals from the Ministry of Enlightenment, a department whose name alone carries Orwellian weight. Here, tyranny isn't decided. It's branded. They don't argue about morality. They calculate public reactions. They discuss perceptions like market trends. The narrative becomes more important than the facts it replaces. Entire populations are reduced to metaphors, and entire histories are edited through language. The word rebellion is replaced with local unrest. The term massacre is softened to containment failure. The process is clean, civil, even polite, and that is precisely why it's so effective. What we're witnessing is the weaponization of vocabulary, not just within the show's world, but within the viewer's emotional space. These scenes normalize euphemism. They demonstrate how easily brutality can be hidden in language that sounds reasonable. And because no one inside the scene objects, the audience absorbs the same emotional cue. These conversations are boring, necessary, and above all, logical. Truth is no longer something that emerges through evidence. It becomes something you shape in advance, then release to the public in the right voice, through the right channels, at the right moment. The viewer is no longer being asked to judge what is right. They are being shown that what matters is what works. In this way, language becomes architecture. It defines the boundaries of perception. And once you live inside it long enough, the walls start to feel like home. By the end of Sagrona Tima, the emotional weight of the episode is subtle but suffocating. You've watched a child surrender her future inside a palace, and you've listened to bureaucrats plan a planetary crackdown like a marketing campaign. Nothing exploded. No blasters were fired. But something in the viewer's nervous system has been reshaped. The idea that control can wear a velvet glove, and that when it does, it feels more like order than oppression. And that is exactly how it wants to feel. The theme continues in episode 3, Harvest. But here it becomes even more direct. We're presented with the outline of a rebellion, ships, missions, codes, risks. But none of it stirs the spirit. The mood never rises. It doesn't even try to. The entire operation, from its first mention to its final planning detail, is wrapped in quiet dread. Cassian doesn't stand at the center of it as a leader. He hovers at the edge as a reluctant participant. His movements feel cautious, detached, even mechanical. There is no fire in him, only obligation, tension, and fatigue. He doesn't look like someone who believes in a cause. He looks like someone trying to avoid being captured by one. The rebels of Gorman, too, offer no emotional rallying point. They don't speak in visions. They don't chant. They don't dream. What they share isn't purpose. It's paranoia. Every conversation is laced with friction. Accusations come quickly. Trust dissolves easily. Even the planning table feels cold, like a place where deals are made out of necessity, not belief. We are told that a mission is coming. The hijacking of an Imperial test ship. But the way this mission is presented feels closer to damage control than liberation. The rebellion here isn't a rising wave. It's a shaky raft patched with secrecy and stress. Strategy takes center stage, while humanity is gently removed from the frame. This is where the conditioning deepens. Because what viewers are being shown, again and again, is a resistance that feels just as rigid as the system it fights. The rebellion moves with protocols, tensions, and bureaucratic caution. There is no contrast between the machine and its opponent. Both feel procedural. Both feel exhausted. The characters who try to shift the tone, who attempt to bring feeling or clarity, are quietly pushed aside. Rylance, a figure who carries political weight and tries to create cohesion, is met with suspicion. His experience, his reputation, even his willingness to act, are treated as liabilities. Leadership in this world is always temporary and always suspect. Meanwhile, characters like Willman, who carry visible pain, are reduced to emotional noise. He wants to act. He speaks from a place of personal loss. He brings urgency to the room. But the structure around him doesn't know what to do with grief, so it silences it. He's treated like a threat to the plan, not a voice within it. Bix follows a similar arc. Her trauma is deep and unresolved. She sees the world clearly because she's suffered through it. But instead of being embraced for that wisdom, she's kept at a distance. Her voice fades into the background, even as the rebellion moves forward without her. This emotional framing is critical because it reinforces a psychological lesson the show has been building from the start. Feeling is dangerous. Expression creates disruption. Vulnerability slows progress. People who speak from the heart or the wound are seen as unstable, even when they're right. The message is subtle, but unmistakable. To be functional, you must be emotionally silent. In the world of Andor, spiritual unity never comes. There are no shared mantras, no collective visions. Rebellion is reduced to operation planning, and the only people who belong are those who can suppress themselves long enough to execute their assigned task. By the end of Harvest, we haven't moved forward in spirit, only in procedure. The rebels are preparing, yes, but they aren't becoming more human. They're becoming more cautious, more controlled. And so is the viewer. Scene by scene, your nervous system adapts. You stop searching for inspiration. You start listening for the next instruction. This isn't a story designed to ignite a movement. It's a story built to simulate the feeling of trying to survive one. As we reach episode 4, Ever Been to Gorman? The title alone sets the tone for what follows. Casual, almost flippant. It turns a name heavy with grief and resistance into a throwaway line. Gorman, once a symbol of collective pain, is now a conversation starter. The question is delivered like it belongs in a travel brochure. This is how systemic violence is absorbed into everyday language, through repetition, distance, and rebranding. The deeper you listen, the more striking the contrast becomes. Inside the Empire's inner chambers, high-ranking officers and technocrats sit comfortably while discussing how to extract resources from the planet, not in spite of resistance, but in anticipation of it. They aren't working around unrest. They are using it. Rebellion becomes part of the pipeline. Civilian lives, ecosystems, even cultural memory are folded into spreadsheets and production timelines. Every voice in the room speaks calmly, using professional detachment to describe what amounts to a planetary violation. No one at the table raises moral objections. No one seems uncomfortable. And because the viewer hears the conversation through this neutral filter, the horror doesn't register as horror. It registers as planning. This is a textbook example of clinical framing of tyranny, where the violence is baked into the strategy, but wrapped in vocabulary that avoids emotional consequence. On the ground, Cassian continues navigating this world with the same posture we've come to recognize. Watchful, isolated, responsive. He doesn't build plans. He looks for exits. Every interaction he has reinforces the emotional programming we've been absorbing from the start. Heroes don't lead here. They evade. Even when opportunities emerge, when rebels speak to him, when risks are proposed, he meets them with measured silence. It's not that he disagrees. It's that he's been trained to expect disappointment. The weight of rebellion once again comes through in tone more than dialogue. There's no promise of meaning. Just another burden. Another chance to lose more than you gain. The title, Ever Been to Gorman, ends up becoming a metaphor for the episode itself. A question that masks its own cruelty. A story that hides the wound behind the smile. And a system that continues to normalize injustice by speaking about it as though it were just part of the job. Episode 5. I Have Friends Everywhere brings Cyril Karn back into focus, and with him, one of the clearest demonstrations of how the series rewards quiet conformity. He has returned to the machinery of Imperial order, stationed now in Gorman, tucked behind the dull fluorescence of the Bureau of Standards. His surroundings are clean, organized, and emotionally flat, just like him. There is no revolution in his eyes, no conflict in his voice. He is fully merged with the system, and that merger is treated as maturity. This isn't just a commentary on Cyril, it's a message to the viewer. In this world, the characters who feel the least turmoil are the ones who function best. He is composed, he follows rules, and in exchange, he's offered a kind of peace. His uniform doesn't symbolize oppression anymore. It symbolizes belonging. This is the long game of emotional conditioning. Show obedience enough times in a tranquil light, and eventually, it begins to feel like wisdom. Meanwhile, Cassian continues to orbit the edge of the rebellion, always close, but never fully inside. People try to reach him. Luthen's agents probe, nudge, invite, but the energy around Cassian remains the same. Observe, assess, protect. He still doesn't pursue a dream. He avoids consequences. He senses that he is being watched, and his first instinct is withdrawal, not defiance. This isn't fear. It's training. He's learned that participation often leads to loss, so he manages his distance. Elsewhere, Mon Mothma is buried further in secrecy. Even her most trusted relationships begin to break down. She attempts to balance public responsibility with private survival, but the space between the two grows more unbearable. Her isolation expands, mirroring the larger theme of the episode. No one is planning a new world. Everyone is just trying to hold their position long enough to avoid collapse. And then there's Luthen. His network begins to splinter, and not because of external force, but because of what secrecy does to human connection. His agents question him. His moves are unpredictable. What once felt like strategic brilliance now looks like emotional decay. His ability to keep secrets has turned into a liability, and instead of feeling supported, his allies feel disposable. I Have Friends Everywhere is a quiet episode, but its impact is devastating. It reinforces the most damaging psychological lesson in the series: that rebellion may exist, but it exists in fragments. Everyone is playing defense. No one is building anything new. Resistance becomes a job, not a cause. By the time we reach episode 6, what a festive evening. The show finally delivers something that, on paper, looks like momentum. A plan is in motion. A target has been selected. The rebels are preparing to strike. But this promise is immediately undercut by the emotional contrast surrounding it. The entire episode is framed through a lavish party, one filled with silk, laughter, and orchestrated civility. The Empire doesn't just rule here. It celebrates. It doesn't march. It dines. Every moment of elegance becomes a shield for violence. While rebels coordinate escape routes and explosives in the background, the camera lingers on gowns, drinks, and polite smiles. This contrast is the core of the conditioning. The Empire doesn't have to show its power. It has become so dominant that it can mask it in charm. The very agents who are overseeing planetary destruction can do so with compliments on their lips and champagne in their hands. The audience is taught, not explicitly but emotionally, that tyranny doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes it looks like diplomacy, efficiency, and taste. Meanwhile, the rebels move like shadows. Their operation, though successful in its mechanics, feels deeply joyless. There are no raised fists, no cathartic release. Only whispered commands, hand signals, and the constant need to vanish. Even in victory, they feel like they are barely holding the pieces together. The show reinforces this by refusing to grant them any emotional reward. There is no celebration. There is no sense that the event has turned the tide. The rebels leave the scene as quietly as they entered. The Empire's party continues. The conversation at the top never stops. What a Festive Evening becomes a masterclass in contrast, not just in visuals, but in psychological impact. One side dances while the other hides. One side feels relaxed. The other feels hunted. And slowly, the viewer's body begins to mirror the rebels. Shoulders tighten. The breath shortens. There is no catharsis, only survival. The most painful part of this episode is its honesty. Because by the end, the rebellion hasn't grown. It hasn't changed the world. It has only reminded us that it exists, and that it is still very, very small. This is how utopia is erased in Andor. There is no final speech that dismisses the dream. There's just a slow fade into emotional depletion until the viewer no longer expects anything better. When the fight ends, all that's left is planning the next one. And that cycle begins to feel like the only thing that's real. Episode 7. Messenger arrives like a quiet knock on the door of something sacred. For the first time in many episodes, the language begins to soften. Cassian, who has spent nearly the entire series in motion, pausing only when forced, is briefly still. A healer rests a hand on him. The words are simple, but they carry a weight the show rarely allows. You are a messenger. Something is moving through you. In a different story, this moment would shift the entire emotional arc. A declaration like that would plant a seed, draw people together, give the audience a glimpse of what might come if resistance could take shape from something deeper than tactics. And for a second, it almost does. The room grows quiet. The characters pause. Even the music seems to hesitate. But just as quickly, the moment is absorbed back into the system. Cassian doesn't reflect on it. The show doesn't build from it. There's no shift in energy. Instead, the language of logistics returns. Escape plans are discussed. Communications are routed through safe houses. The healer's words become just another line of dialogue in a show that has taught its characters and its audience to be suspicious of transcendence. This is where one of the most subtle but powerful forms of conditioning takes place. The show doesn't mock vision. It simply avoids following it. It offers flashes of meaning, but no narrative permission to dwell there. You feel something almost rise, but it doesn't lead. It doesn't unify. It doesn't grow. Hope stays private, unspoken, and unsupported, just like always. Episode 8. Who Are You? Continues that emotional narrowing. Every interaction in this episode is guarded. Every conversation is wrapped in subtext. The title sounds like an invitation toward self-awareness or connection, but what we receive instead is the opposite. Disconnection sharpened by constant surveillance. Characters who once shared intimacy now speak in code. Eye contact is brief. The emotional center of the show has been hollowed out and replaced with strategy. Even when Cassian reconnects with allies from Ferrix, their shared history doesn't bring closeness. It brings hesitation, pain. The past isn't a bond anymore. It's a liability. Throughout the episode, cameras appear in the background. Droids observe. Agents hover at the edges. But no one panics. No one hides. That's the key. Surveillance has moved from threat to texture. It has become part of the environment. Unchallenged, unspoken, accepted. This is how conditioning enters the body. Not through alarms, but through normalization. The characters no longer react to being watched. They shape themselves to be watchable. Every word, every step, every pause is adjusted for visibility. And as the audience watches them behave this way, the message is absorbed. This is how people move in systems of control. Quietly, strategically, always with one eye on the unseen audience. Even the episode's title, Who Are You?, feels like an echo from another genre. The kind of question that could lead to transformation. But here, it leads nowhere. It dissolves into routines. Identity is still a risk. Expression is still a liability. Episode 9. Welcome to the Rebellion carries a title that should feel like a threshold. A moment of clarity, unity, maybe even triumph. But from the very first scene, the tone dismantles that expectation. There are no raised banners, no shared vision, no celebration. What we witness instead is disarray, fractured command, panic in the streets. The people of Gorman rise, but they rise in desperation, not strategy. The plaza fills, shouts erupt, A crowd gathers in grief and memory. And for one moment, just one, there is a voice. Drina steps forward. She speaks with clarity, with emotion, with presence. Her words cut through the fog. She doesn't stammer. She doesn't flinch. In a different show, this would be the turning point, the moment when truth reaches the people and begins to change them. But within seconds, the riot troopers move. Gas spreads. Shots fire. Drina's voice is erased not by argument, but by volume. Her final message vanishes into screams and static. The rest of the episode moves in strobe light rhythms. Arrests, injuries, broadcasts, shutdowns. There is no coordination, just scattered outbreaks of rage and grief. And behind every moment is the Empire, responding not with brute force alone, but with efficiency, with rhythm, with emotional detachment. Protest becomes footage. Death becomes data. And everything is cataloged for further analysis. This episode, more than any other, layers all 13 conditioning tactics at once. We see the broken hero figure. Cassian once again unable to lead, only react. Loyalty remains fragile. Hope stays internal. The language used by the Empire is precise, professional. Surveillance is unflinching. And there is still no dream spoken aloud for what comes after. Welcome to the rebellion becomes the most bitter irony of all. The rebellion doesn't welcome. It disperses. It bleeds. It loses control. And the viewer, after watching the movement come together for so long, finally sees what it leads to: flame, footage, and fallout. There is no joy in this uprising. There is no meaning that survives the tear gas. And so the nervous system, once again, recalibrates. You stop waiting for the music to rise. You stop looking for the speech that turns hearts. You begin to expect only what Andor has always delivered: the choreography of despair. And in doing so, you become even more fluent in the emotional habits of control. The final arc of Andor Season 2 unfolds over 3 hauntingly quiet episodes: Who Else Knows?, Make It Stop, and Jedha, Kyber, Urso. These are not grand finales. They are slow descents. There is no rise, no triumph, no final exhale. Instead, what we experience is a kind of emotional erosion, a tightening of the world around each character, and an even tighter framing of what rebellion actually means when stripped of fantasy. Who Else Knows opens with the fear of exposure. The title itself is a question designed to create panic, not just for the characters, but for the viewer as well. The question echoes through every scene. Who's listening? Who can be trusted? What part of me is already known? By now, surveillance is no longer an external force. It lives inside the characters. It shapes their posture, their language, their choices. Every conversation is filtered. Every glance is calculated. The question isn't how to act freely. It's how to act believably inside a controlled world. This is when sanitized surveillance reaches its final form. Not just as a technology, but as an internalized behavior. Daedra Miro, once the face of composed authoritarian precision, begins to realize the fragility of her position. She thought she was part of the system, but as Gorman's fallout intensifies and scapegoats are needed, the very machine she served begins to turn inward. Her power dissolves not in protest, but in bureaucracy. The violence she managed so well now circles back toward her with the same calm detachment. The system doesn't protect its tools. It recycles them. Meanwhile, Luthen is on the run. His network has splintered, his contacts have vanished, and the tools he spent years assembling now serve other agendas. His death, which comes quietly, with no warning and no spectacle, feels like the natural end for someone who traded his soul for strategy. There is no martyrdom here, no speech, just the quiet collapse of a man who played chess for too long and ran out of pieces. His fall doesn't galvanize anyone. It's simply processed and moved past. A clean deletion. Make It Stop follows with what might be the most emotionally suffocating episode in the series. It isn't centered around a battle or a revelation. It revolves around the slow mental breakdown of several characters who have carried too much for too long. Cassian is fractured. Bix is nearly silent. Cyril is directionless once again. Even Mon Mothma, surrounded by influence and wealth, begins to feel like a hollow figurehead in a room full of shadows. The title becomes less of a plea and more of a diagnosis. Everyone in this world is overwhelmed, but no one is allowed to step out. The rebellion has become perpetual motion, a machine of its own, grinding forward without clarity. The characters don't ask how to win anymore. They ask how to keep going without breaking apart. And here, Andor performs its final act of conditioning. It shows that rebellion, once stripped of unity, vision, and emotional coherence, becomes just another system to survive. The structure of resistance mirrors the structure of control. Strategy replaces meaning. Trauma replaces mission. Everyone is running, hiding, moving. But no one is healing. No one is resting. No one is becoming more human. By the time we reach the final episode, Jedha, Kyber, Urso, the galaxy itself feels quiet. The planet Jedha, sacred to the Force, once a symbol of spiritual awakening, now lies under occupation. People whisper in alleys. Old temples are scanned and looted. What was once holy has been folded into military inventory. Kyber crystals, which once powered lightsabers, are now just fuel. Meaning has been reprocessed into usefulness. The name Urso flickers at the edge of the episode. Galen, the architect of the Death Star, is mentioned in fragments. A footnote in a plan too large for any single conscience. The audience is reminded that the greatest acts of resistance often begin as sabotage, not speeches. But this reminder doesn't come with energy. It comes with exhaustion. The rebellion, by the end of this episode, holds no clear victories. It does not overthrow the Empire. It doesn't seize control. It doesn't even hold the frame. It simply endures. It escapes. Cassian once again survives. He's alive. He still moves. But there's nothing celebratory about it. He doesn't look toward the stars. He doesn't speak of what comes next. He walks with the posture of someone who understands that the fight will outlive him, and that maybe, just maybe, it was never going to be winnable in the way we once imagined. And this is where the final conditioning lands. The viewer has not been stirred into rebellion. They've been trained for containment. Every emotional high was pulled away. Every vision was left undeclared. Every possible catharsis was delayed or denied. There is no dramatic payoff, just a growing fluency in how to operate inside something enormous and unchangeable. The audience is left with fragments of truth and a warning that understanding the machine will not release you from it. It will teach you how to function inside of it with a little less pain, a little less friction, a little more awareness that this is simply how things are. This is the final emotional product of Andor Season 2. You leave with adaptation. You carry tension instead of outrage. You no longer ask where the future is headed. You ask how long you can stay ahead of collapse. And in a world shaped by control, that may be the most dangerous message of all. Because once resistance becomes just another form of management, the system has already won. But what if it had been different? What if Andor had taken all that intelligence, all that restraint, and used it not to harden the human spirit, but to open it? What if the story had kept its grit and complexity, but pointed it toward healing instead of resignation. Imagine a final arc, 3 episodes long, that carried the same characters through the same darkness, but gave them and us something more than endurance, something beyond escape. Imagine a version of Andor, where understanding the machine became the first step toward transcending it. In this version, who else knows would still begin with paranoia. The surveillance would still hum, and betrayal would still hang in the air. But this time, instead of folding inward, one character, perhaps Cassian, perhaps Bix, would finally name the pattern out loud. Not just the Empire's actions, but its logic, its rhythm, its emotional manipulation. A conversation would take place, not about plans or safe houses, but about what the Empire has done to the human soul, how it has replaced community with suspicion, how it has replaced meaning with performance. And for the first time, the rebels wouldn't just resist with weapons, they would begin to resist with clarity. That clarity would spread. In Make It Stop, we would witness the cracks inside the rebellion. Yes, but instead of breaking further, they would begin to repair. Cassian, who spent 2 seasons running, would finally pause, and instead of speaking in code, he would speak in truth. Maybe only to one person, but it would be real. He would name the grief he carries. He would stop trying to look useful and simply become present. The rebels around him would stop arguing about tactics long enough to rediscover what they actually want. There would be no long speech, no swelling score, just a single question asked clearly. If we survive this, what kind of world do we want to live in? And for the first time, someone would answer it. And that answer would echo through the final episode. Jedha Kyber Urso. A planet long plundered for spiritual energy would become the place where the rebellion remembers why it began. Not in revenge, but in reverence. Jedha's people would not fight for territory. They would gather to restore the memory of what was sacred. The rebellion would no longer just steal plans. It would reclaim meaning. Kyber crystals would stop being fuel. They would become symbols. Fragments of the Force, carried by those who remember that rebellion must be more than reaction. It must carry a vision that pulls people toward something beautiful, not just away from something cruel. Urso's name would still carry weight, but instead of being remembered for the weapon he helped build, he would be honored for the flaw he left behind. A reminder that even inside the machine, a human can carve space for collapse. And in this version, the rebellion wouldn't win by escaping. It would win by imagining, by refusing to adopt the emotional vocabulary of the Empire, by showing that the most powerful act of resistance isn't sabotage, it's the restoration of shared vision. Cassian wouldn't walk away heavy. He would walk away changed. Not because he survived, but because he finally chose something to live for. And that choice would be offered to every viewer, not as spectacle, but as invitation. You would leave the series lighter, not because it lied to you, but because it gave you back something the real world keeps trying to take. The idea that humans are more than reactive. We are creative. We are sacred. We are capable of building worlds worth protecting. That's the story Andor could have told. And that's the kind of story we're going to keep searching for. Across shows, across films, across the entire machinery of modern storytelling. So if this perspective resonates, if you're tired of being emotionally managed by clever scripts and want to see the deeper patterns hidden inside the stories we're told, then subscribe. We're only just beginning, and there's so much more to uncover.